Hey, I'm Zannerman. As you may have guessed from the title of this video is about the mod Prophecy of Pendor for Mount & Blade Warband. Anyway, let's talk about the real subject of the video. Sirenroot, Deluge of Deceit is a mod originally uploaded on the Nexus in 2023, made by the user Everglade. The mod appears to be primarily a one-man project, though as any larger mod is likely to have, it has a lot of contributors. It features what is, in my opinion, good voice acting.
Some of the fish around here might have that property if you boil it correctly. Barnacles are potent too.
And it has a soundtrack made by the composer of the hit single Dagoth Wave, that is to say, Young Scrolls, on YouTube. What does the mod have to offer? I hear you cry out in abject non-Euclidean horror. The mod is centered around a single dungeon. The parts before and after the dungeon are quite short. What makes it unique, however, comes from both visuals and gameplay. It uses an Alien tileset, which sets it apart from pretty much every other dungeon in base game Skyrim. That by itself made the dungeon feel fresh and exciting to me. From a gameplay side of things, the dungeon focuses on different aspects of play. Puzzles. Sure, there are combat encounters sprinkled in and some social encounters along the way, but combat is never really the challenge here, only a roadblock. The puzzles are what I would call the main focus of the mod. I was a bit hesitant to try it at first, due to the focus on puzzles. If you feel that way, you really shouldn't. I'm not much of a puzzle gamer, but I found them to be really fun to go through. The puzzles had interesting gimmicks, such as manipulating water levels. I think inspirations from such games as the Zelda series are quite apparent. There wasn't a puzzle in Sirenroot that I couldn't solve on my own, perhaps with a bit of wrinkling of the old brain. If you get stuck, there is a walkthrough on the mod's Nexus page that has solutions to all the puzzles, but honestly, I didn't need it during my playthrough. The puzzles feel like they were playtested quite heavily to be solvable, without being tediously obvious. That, coupled with the level design, quality of voice acting, and general polish, makes the mod feel like one of the most professional mods I've had the pleasure to play for Skyrim. There are some things I want to talk about in regards to the narrative. You will be working for the Blackbriars, or at least part of the Blackbriar family. And the mod won't assume that you are the Dragonborn, only that you're a mercenary looking for work, which makes the mod accessible to a wider range of characters, if your main style of play is roleplay. However, at the same time, the story is fairly straightforward. There is a mystery to uncover over the course of your journey, but I can't really consider the narrative in this mod to be the main selling point for playing it. I think the selling point is the gameplay. That's not to say that the narrative is bad, it's good, but going into it will require spoilers, so I recommend you play the mod for yourself. It's one of the best dungeons I've come across. It has some interesting NPCs to travel alongside, choices that matter, a mystery to uncover, not to mention a good haul of treasure to loot. I don't really have any issues with it either, save for one section that I felt was weaker than the rest. I won't go over everything the mod has to offer, but there will be spoilers beyond this point. Sirenroot begins in Elgrim's Elixirs,
Near the city of Coral.
well, in Riften. At the shop you can find a new NPC, Frissa Blackbriar. Frissa is the aunt of Ingen Blackbriar, and is looking for mercenaries to do some diving work. At the bottom of Lake Honrich lies a cave in which a flower grows called the Sirenroot, with valuable alchemical properties. And to gather this plant, they're putting together a team.
We're not joining your team.
I'm putting together a team.
We're in.
While the quest mentions that both Ingen and Frissa are involved in the venture, Ingen won't have any dialogue relating to the quest. I do like tying the quest deeper into the world by including existing NPCs into the narrative, but in a perfect world, that would also mean new interactions with those NPCs. But this is modding we're talking about, and I'm just glad that they mention Ingen's involvement. The rest of the team is gathering for the mission near Merryfair Farm, just outside Riften. When you arrive, the other 4 members of the group are already there. You can speak with all of them before the mission begins, and learn more about who you will be working with. It will be important later. There are 4 members. Tilael, a sea elf from Bravil in Cyrodiil. Cairis Bentive, a Breton woman from Cyrodiil. Ynil, an Argonian mercenary and Ingen's assistant. Pelletius Flonel, an East Empire Company sailor. Each of them stand out from the others, and some of them feel unique. For instance, I haven't seen a sea elf in a mod before, which makes Tilail immediately stand out with a unique appearance. I found that the three mercenaries, Tilail, Keris, and Pelletius, all have a lot upfront personality baked into their design from their appearance, so I liked them from the get-go. Yneil is a bit more standard, but he'll get a bit more development later on to flesh him out. Like I mentioned before, I think the voice acting is good. I think the voices fit the person, and they sound like what I would expect them to sound like.
I'm Tilael. Grew up in Breville, bounced around some guilds for work, but diving is always the easiest.
Of course. I come from a long line of humble dock workers that frequented their voyages around Stros Mackay.
Did they? I was expecting more to come. That's fine. The plant should be prepared for uprooting by now.
Me? Oh, where to begin? I'm originally from Wayrest, a mother of 2 aspiring mages, and I primarily assist with a variety of research down in the Arcane University.
And there wasn't any audio glitches or mismatch between the subtitles and what is spoken, or drastic switches in tone that you sometimes find. That means that the voice acting is really good, in my book. Once preparations are done, you can speak to Yneil to begin the mission. The first step is to dive down into the cavern entrance at the bottom of the lake. There we enter a cave system and find the group is already inside. A ladder at the start of the cave will let you escape if you forgot to turn the stove off at home, but we press on. The cavern has some crystal formations that Keris confirms to be Welkind crystals. At the far end of the cave you find the Sirenroot flower, the flower that you're here to find. Now that's an easy mission, nothing could go wrong, right? When we pull the flower, the floor collapses, and we fall.
Hey, you're finally awake.
As we wake, the skeletons of other unfortunates lie all around you, and we find ourselves in unfamiliar tunnels, and you must find a way to escape this dungeon. For the rest of the dungeon you will be locked in, as you look for a way to escape. The dungeon is fairly expansive and will take some time to complete. You quickly find out that the cavern connects to ruins. Ruins that might be familiar if you have played Beyond Skyrim Bruma or Oblivion. These are Ayleid ruins. Here in the first chamber, the mod introduces a new mechanic that allows you to vault up walls marked with white scuff marks, which is a fairly minor mechanic all things considered, but it feels like a pretty natural inclusion, and I quickly got used to having the option. The first rune chamber also contains the first of many puzzles, which involves diving through a cave system to reach a button that will open the gate forward. I like that there is a cutscene that shows you what happens when you press the button. It's very Zelda-esque and helps you navigate. Doing some more dungeon delving, we'll start coming across Skelly Men and the Ghost of Christmas Past. Undead are the main enemy in this dungeon. While there are some combat encounters, they never felt like much of a threat. It was nice to bash some skulls in between puzzles and exploration, but I was never in any real danger of dying during any of the enemy encounters. I'm not saying it isn't possible to be challenged, but my mod setup meant I was strong enough to take down anything I faced. I do use Morrowind Ultimate and locational encounter zones to de-level the world, but I didn't patch Sirenroot for those, though it may be that it was intentionally on the easier side of the difficulty scale. If so, I think that's a good design decision, because the mod locks you into the dungeon at the start. If the dungeon was also very dangerous and challenging, the act of removing the opportunity to leave and come back later when you are stronger is not a great idea. That would just make it a frustrating experience, or force the player to load a save that might be an hour or two back when they discover that they're unprepared for the challenge they're facing. The lower difficulty also means that the mod is suitable for lower level characters. Tilail is the first of the party we find down here. She lies unconscious in a room filled with water. Once we approach and interact with her, she'll wake up. It seems the others from our party have suffered the same fate as we did. The cave collapsed and they fell down into these lower levels. So as we explore further, we'll keep a lookout for the others and try to find a way to escape this place. Alive! Well, dead is also valid, and I love that for you. Together with Tilael, we continue onwards. The mod provides some really great vistas. Entering the main chamber, for instance, opens to a beautiful shot of the cavern chamber. At the far end of the chamber, we see an Aeliad statue. The space has clearly been designed with this vista in mind, and that's an aspect of good level design. This main chamber is one we'll return to again and again over the course of the dungeon crawl. It acts as a sort of hub and features the main objective, which is to find 4 Welkind crystals, and when we finally find the other members of the party, they'll gather in this central chamber as well. It also has some bedrolls if you run a needs mod. While the main chamber has many exits, I think there is only one path open at a time, so the story and exploration will be quite linear. Along the first path, you meet up with Kay Reese. She provides an optional objective to find her notes, which were dropped somewhere in the room she's standing in. During the course of the mod, there are several of these optional side objectives, which I think will impact the outcome of those characters' stories. You do meet up with Pelletius as well, and he seems to be more concerned with looking for loot than regrouping with the others and escaping the dungeon. He opens the path forward for you and you return to the main chamber. On another path you meet a spirit named Laralace, who tells you to rest, but that seems a bit iffy to me, so I had a look around. You can find 2 notes hidden away that combined tell you to fight back, so I attacked the spirits and was teleported elsewhere in the dungeon. Quite a neat hint, and it was nice that there was another option, rather than just take the spirit at face value. You also meet Ynil, so he's alive too. He is on another side of a broken door, and you can't find the path to join up with him at the moment, but you'll meet him again later. Tilael rejoins you for another time-based puzzle that you first have to do alone, and then take control of Tilael and do the same puzzle again as her. Possibly with a time crunch as undeads close in on her, but I never got to that point. A pretty cool mechanic. She mentions that she saw a tall, armored Dunmer in the ruins, which will be relevant later. By now you should have an idea of the structure. You'll explore, do puzzles, and encounter the other characters for small sections. I'll talk a bit about the narrative here. As you go through the dungeon, you'll start to realize that
something evil has ravaged these lands.
Beyond just regular skelly boys, the characters start acting strangely, hearing voices and whispers that you can't make out, and seeing visions of things that may or may not be there. Each of the 4 characters has a section dedicated to them. As you look for each of the 4 Welkin stones you need to find to open the portal forward. Along the way, you can convince them to join back up in the main chamber, if you make the right choices. Otherwise, they may end up dead, or worse. No, they'll just end up dead. For instance, one section has you go with Pelletius to look for a treasure. What follows is a long water-based section, which is a bit confusing to navigate, due to its labyrinthine nature. I was stuck here for a bit, trying to find the correct path forward. When I found him, he was wounded and raving. His dad had appeared before him, in a vision, while he was looting treasure, and his amulet began to sear his skin, so he dropped it at the bottom of a well. And Pelletius wants you to get it back because it has a water-breathing enchantment on it. Now, the problem comes with there being at least one amulet that looks just like his down there, and you have to find the right one. Now, I think I gave him the wrong amulet, because later I found his corpse floating in the water on my way back. He was the only NPC I wasn't able to save on my playthrough. But it's neat that there are actual consequences for your decisions, and that you can make the wrong decisions in the first place. Talking with the NPCs and through the events you experience, you figure out a couple of things, like that the ruins belong to the Aeliad elves, and it seemed to be the home of an Aeliad princess by the name of Laralace. Now, for anyone who knows Elder Scrolls lore, the Aeliad are generally bad news. You find some notes scattered about of a previous adventuring company that came down into the ruins, and their descent into madness and death, same as what seems to be happening to the current group too. So what is happening to your group of misfortunates? Well, I already went over what happened to Pelletius, but the others have their own problems to deal with. Tilael is being entranced by the ghost of a sea elf that arrived here with the previous adventuring party. Kay Reese hears voices whispering in her head, and you have to select the correct conversation options to convince her to snap out of it. Luckily, I had recordings of my first interactions with her, so I could just go back and rewatch the dialogue. And Unil seems to be a paranoid lizard who believes there's a Morag Tong assassin after him. You can try to convince him that it's hallucinations like the others seem to have had, but he remains convinced that the assassin is out there. And he's completely sane. With all the welkin crystals gathered, and the party back in the central chamber, at least those still alive, you can open a portal that will take you to the inner sanctum and the final boss. There is a build-up throughout the dungeon of this final boss. There's something evil in the depths, something that calls out to the characters around you, who has driven the unwary to their doom. There is an evil that summons the dead to rise again and binds the spirits of fallen adventurers to her bidding, the Ayleid princess, Laralace. Well, it turns out it's a Wisp Mother. Now, the fight isn't just as straightforward as a standard enemy fight. You face off against some undead, together with your companions, and you have to break through some crystals to power down the shield around the Wisp Mother. But once that's done, it turns into a pretty straightforward fight. The second stage does have a bunch of ghosts spawn in to help the Wisp Mother. When I mentioned that there was a section I felt was weaker than the rest, I feel like this final fight is that section. It's not as exciting as the rest of the dungeon before it. For one, you don't get any meaningful dialogue or characterization from the boss, and it doesn't have much in terms of mechanics once you break the barrier. Given the quality of the dungeon preceding it, the boss felt like a bit of a letdown. Now I say letdown, but I say that because it is a Skyrim boss. Probably as good or better than most base game bosses. But that's as far as it goes. There isn't really anything to elevate it beyond what Skyrim already does, like the rest of the dungeon. Once the boss dies, the ruins begin to collapse. The next step is to find the exit and escape as the place begins to flood. When you find the exit, you black out and wake up on the shore of the lake where you started. The others are there too, at least those who survived. They all have some things to say about what you experienced down there and talk about their plans going forward. But eventually you're directed to return to Frissa, Blackbriar, for your reward. You're given a final option when speaking to Frissa, to give her the Sirenroot flower or to withhold it. If you do give her the flower, you will get some additional gold for your troubles, but you do get a reward even if you don't deliver anything. And that pretty much wraps up Sirenroot. Honestly, I don't have a whole lot more to say about Sirenroot, other than that it is a very well put together dungeon. I found it very enjoyable to play through. I suppose I feel like there could have been a stronger end boss, or a bit more of a narrative payoff at the end, but it gives you choices and consequences that matter throughout the story, and great gameplay. So the journey to get there is great. I also would have liked to spend more time with the characters, but they were fleshed out fairly well for the brief time we spent with them. Sirenroot is worth giving a try if you want to experience a new high-quality quest. It is self-contained and doesn't bleed into other parts of Skyrim, and it is lore-friendly, as far as I can gather. I didn't use any other mods for Sirenroot. It works well on its own. Even on a larger mod list I didn't have any crashes or issues with scripts, so it's fairly stable, in my experience. It has my recommendation. So yeah, that was all I had to say on Sirenroot.